Guys, none of that saved recording wise. Oh man, that's disappointing. Well, uh, maybe I'll read those chapters another time. Man, well, that's okay. Well, we're doing Harry Potter. We'll do Harry Potter now. Do a chapter or two of it. Shorter chapters as we're getting to the end. There are some monster of chapters earlier on in the book. It is a thick book, worth reading. I feel like it's quite low on people's favourites though, in terms of Harry Potter. Uh, the Half-Blood Prince, that is. Most people, they'd say their favourites was 3 or maybe 4. 4 is my favourite. I do love the fourth book. The Trials and the Quidditch World Cup. We might do it next once we finish this, but on to chapter 25. Let's get myself situated. It's called A Seer Overheard. The fact that Harry Potter was going out with Ginny Weasley seemed to interest a great number of people, most of them girls, yet Harry found himself newly and happily impervious to gossip over the next few weeks. After all, it made a very nice change to be talked about because of something that was making him happier than because of something uh, being. Hold on. Being for very, he could remember being for a very long time, rather than because he had been involved with horrific scenes of dark magic. You think people had better things to gossip about, said Ginny, as she sat on the common room floor, leaning against Harry's legs and reading the Daily Prophet. 3 Dementor attacks in a week, and all Romilda Vane does is ask me if it's true you've got a hippogriff tattooed across your chest. Ron and Hermione both roar with laughter. Harry ignored them. And what did you tell her? I told her it's a Hungarian horntail, says Ginny, turning the page of the newspaper idly. Much more macho. Thanks, said Harry, grinning. And what did you tell her Ron's got? A pygmy puff, but I didn't say where. Ron scowled as Hermione rolled around laughing. Watch it, he said, pointing warningly at Harry and Ginny. Just because I've given permission doesn't mean I can't withdraw it. Your permission? Scoffs Ginny. Since when did you give me permission to do anything? Anyway, you said yourself you'd rather it was Harry than Dean or Michael. Yeah, I would, says Ron grudgingly, and just as long as you don't start snogging each other in public. You filthy hypocrite. What about you and Lavender thrashing around like a pair of eels all over the place? Oh, hello, sir. Welcome to the chat. Thanks for the nice message. Demanded Ginny, but Ron's tolerance was not to be tested, much as they had moved into June, for Harry and Ginny's time together was becoming increasingly restricted. Ginny's hours were approaching, and she was therefore more forced to revise for hours into the night. On one such evening, when Ginny had retired to the library, and Harry was sitting beside the window in the common room, supposedly finishing his herbology homework, but in reality reliving a particularly happy hour that he'd had spent down by the lake with Ginny at lunchtime, Hermione dropped into the seat between him and Ron, and with an unpleasant, purposeful look on her face. I want to talk to you, Harry. What about? Said Harry suspiciously. Only the previous day, Hermione had told him off for distracting Ginny when she ought to be working hard for her examinations. The so-called half-blood prince. Oh, not again, he groaned. Would you please drop it? He had not dared to return to the room of requirement to retrieve his book, and his performance in potions had suffered accordingly, though Slughorn, who approved of Ginny, had jocularly attributed this to Harry being lovesick. But Harry was sure that Snape had not yet given up hope of laying hands on the prince's book, and was determined to leave it where it was until Snape remained, or while he remained on the lookout. I'm not dropping it, said Hermione firmly, until you've heard me out. Now, I've been trying to find out a bit about who might make a hobby of inventing dark spells. He didn't make a hobby of it. He, who says it's a he? We've been through this, said Harry. Prince, Hermione, Prince. Right, said Hermione, red patches blazing on her cheeks as she pulled out a very old piece of newspaper from her pocket and slammed it on the table in front of Harry. Look at that! Look at that picture! Harry picked up a crumbling piece of paper and stared at the moving photograph, yellowed with age. Ron leaned over for a quick look. The picture showed a skinny girl of around 15. She was not pretty. She looked simultaneously cross and sullen, with heavy brows and a long, pallid face. Underneath the photograph was the caption, Eileen Prince, captain of the Hogwarts Gobstones team. So, said Harry, scanning down the short news item to where the picture was. It was a rather dull story about inter-school competitions. Her name was Eileen Prince. Prince Harry. They looked at each other, and Harry realised what Hermione was trying to say. He burst out laughing. No way. What? You think she was a half-blood? Oh, come on. Well, why not, Harry? There aren't any real princes in the wizarding world. It's either a nickname or a made-up title someone's given themselves. Or it could be their actual name, couldn't it? No, listen. If, say, her father was a wizard whose surname was Prince, and her mother was a muggle, that would make her a half-blood prince. Yeah, very ingenious, Hermione. But it would. Maybe she's proud of herself at being half a prince. Listen, Hermione, I can tell it's not a girl. I can just tell. The truth is that you don't think a girl would have been clever enough, said Hermione angrily. Now, can I have hung around with you for 5 years and not think girls are clever? Said Harry, stung by this. It's the way he writes. I just know the prince is a bloke. I can tell. This girl hasn't got anything to do with it. Where did you get this, anyway? The library, said Hermione predictably. There's a whole collection of old prophets up there, and I'm about to find out more about Eileen Prince if I can. Enjoy yourself, said Harry irritably. I will, said Hermione. And the first place I'll look, she shot at him, as she reached the portrait hole, is the records of all old potions awards. Harry scowled after her for a moment, then continued his contemplation of the darkening sky. She's never got over you outperforming her in potions, said Ron, returning to his copy of 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. You don't think I'm mad, wanting that book back, do you? Of course not, said Ron robustly. He's a genius, the prince. Anyway, without his bezoar tip, he drew a finger significantly across his own throat, I wouldn't be here to discuss it, would I? I mean, I'm not saying that spell you used on Malfoy was great, but nor am I, said Harry quickly. But he healed all right, didn't he? Back on his feet in no time. Yeah, said Harry. This was perfectly true, although his conscience squirmed a bit all the same, thanks to Snape. You still got detention with Snape this Saturday? Ron continued. Yeah, and the Saturday after that, and the Saturday after that, sighed Harry. And he's hinting now that if I don't get all the boxes done by the end of term, we'll carry on next year. He was finding these detentions particularly irksome because they cut down the already limited time he would have been spending with Ginny. Instead, he frequently wondered lately whether Snape did not know this, or whether he was keeping Harry later and later every time, while making pointed asides about Harry having to miss the good weather and the varied opportunities it offered. Harry was shaken from these bitter reflections by the appearance at his side of Jimmy Peakes, who was holding out a scroll of parchment. Thanks, Jimmy. Hey, it's from Dumbledore, said Harry excitedly, unrolling the parchment and scanning it. He wants me to go to his office as quick as I can. They stared at each other. Blimey, whispered Bron. You don't reckon... Has he found... I'd better go and see, hadn't I? Said Harry, jumping to his feet. He hurried out of the common room and along the 7th floor as fast as he could, passing nobody but Peeves, who swooped in the opposite direction, throwing bits of chalk at Harry in a routine sort of way, and cackling loudly as he dodged Harry's defensive jinx. Once Peeves had vanished, there was silence in the corridors. Only 15 minutes left until curfew, Most people had already returned to their common rooms. And then Harry heard a scream and a crash. He stopped in his tracks, listening. How dare you? Ah! The noise was coming from a corridor nearby. Harry sprinted towards it, his wand at the ready, hurtled around another corner, and saw Professor Trelawney sprawled upon the floor, her head covered in one of her shawls, several sherry bottles lying beside her, one broken. Professor. Harry hurried forwards and helped Professor Trelawney to her feet. Some of her glistening beads had become entangled in her glasses. She hiccuped loudly, patted her hair, and pulled herself from Harry's arms. Welcome to the chat. What's happening, Professor? You may well ask, she said shrilly. I was strolling along, brooding upon certain dark portents I happened to have glimpsed. But Harry was not paying much attention. He had just noticed where he was standing, that they were right at the tapestry of the dancing trolls, and, on his left, that smoothly impenetrable stretch of stone that concealed. Professor, were you trying to get into the room of requirement? Omens, for which I have vouchsafed. What? She was suddenly shifty. The room of requirement, repeated Harry. Were you trying to get in there? Well, I don't know how students know about that. Not all of them do, said Harry. But what happened? You screamed. It sounded like you were hurt. Well, said Professor Trelawney, drawing her shawls around her defensively and staring down at him with her vastly magnified eyes. I wish to deposit certain personal items in the room. She muttered something about nasty accusations. Right, said Harry, glancing down at the sherry bottles. But you couldn't get in and hide them? He found this very odd. The room had opened for him, after all, when he wanted to hide the Half-Blood Prince's book. Oh, I got in all right, said Professor Trelawney, glaring at the wall. But there was someone already in there. Someone in... Who? Demanded Harry. Who was in there? I have no idea, said Professor Trelawney, looking slightly taken aback at the urgency in Harry's voice. I walked into the room and I heard a voice, which has never happened before in all my years of hiding, using the room of requirement, I mean. A voice? Saying what? I don't know that it was saying anything, said Professor Trelawney. It was whooping. Whooping? Gleefully, she said, nodding. Harry stared at her. Was it male or female? I would hazard a guess at male, said Professor Trelawney. It sounded happy. Very happy, said Professor Trelawney sniffily. As though it was celebrating? Most definitely. And then? And then I called out, Who's there? You couldn't have found out who was there without asking? Harry asked her, slightly frustrated. The inner eye, said Professor Trelawney with dignity, straightening her shawls and many strands of glistening beads, was fixed upon was fixed on matters well outside the mundane realms of whooping voices. Right, said Harry hastily. He'd heard about Professor Trelawney's inner eye too often. And did the voice say who was there? No, it did not, she said. Everything was pitch black, and the next thing I knew, I was being hurtled head first out of the room. And you didn't see that coming? Said Harry, unable to help himself. No, I did not. As I say, it was a pitch. She stopped and glared at him suspiciously. I think you'd better tell Professor Dumbledore, said Harry. He ought to know Malfoy's celebrating. I mean, that someone threw you out of the room. To his surprise, Professor Trelawney drew herself up at this suggestion, looking haughty. The headmaster has intimated that he would prefer fewer visits from me, she said coldly, and I am not one to press my company on those who do not value it. If Dumbledore chooses to ignore the warnings the cards show, her bony hand closed around Harry's wrist. Again and again, no matter how I lay them out. She pulled a card dramatically from underneath her shawls. The lightning-struck tower, she whispered. Calamity, disaster, coming nearer all the time. Right, said Harry again. Well, I still think you should tell Dumbledore about his voice and everything going dark and being thrown out of the room. You think so? Professor Trelawney seemed to consider the matter for a moment, but Harry could tell that she liked the idea of retelling her little adventure. I'm going to see him right now, said Harry. I've got a meeting with him. We should go together. Well, in that case, said Professor Trelawney with a smile. She bent down, scooped up her sherry bottles, and dumped them unceremoniously in a large blue and white vase standing in a nearby niche. I miss having you in classes, Harry, she said soulfully, as they set off together. You were never much of a seer, but you were a wonderful object. Harry did not reply. He loathed being the object of Professor Trelawney's continual predictions of doom. I'm afraid, she went on, that the centaur, knows nothing of cartomancy. I asked him, one seer to another, had he not too sensed the distant vibrations of coming catastrophe? And he seemed to find me almost comical. Yes, comical. Her voice rose rather hysterically, and Harry caught a powerful whiff of sherry, even though the bottles had been left behind. Perhaps the horse has heard other people say that I have not inherited my great-great-grandmother's gift, whose rumours had been bandied about by the jealous for years. You know what I say to such people, Harry? Would Dumbledore have let me teach in this great school, put all his trust in me all those years, had I not proved myself to him? Harry mumbled something indistinct. Well, I remember my first interview with Dumbledore, went on Professor Trelawney, in throaty tones. He was deeply impressed, of course, deeply impressed. I was staying at the Hog's Head, which I do not advise incidentally. Bedbugs, dear boy. But funds were low. Dumbledore did me the courtesy of calling upon me in the room in the inn, and questioned me. I must confess, at first I thought he seemed ill-disposed towards divination, and I remember that I was starting to feel a little odd. I had not eaten much that day. But then, and now Harry was paying attention properly for the first time, for he knew what had happened then. Professor Trelawney had made the prophecy which had altered the course of his whole life, the prophecy about him and Voldemort. But then we were rudely interrupted by Severus Snape. What? Yes, there was a commotion outside the door, and it flew open, and there was a rather uncouth barman standing with Snape, who was waffling about having come the wrong way up the stairs, although I'm afraid that I myself rather thought he had been apprehended eavesdropping on my interview with Dumbledore. You see, he himself was seeking the job at the time, or a job at the time, and no doubt hoped to pick up tips. Well, after that, Dumbledore seemed much more disposed to give me the job, and I could not help but think, Harry, that it was because he appreciated the stark contrast between my own unassuming manners and quiet talent compared to the pushing, thrusting young man who was prepared to listen at keyholes. Harry, dear? She looked over her shoulder, having only just realized Harry was no longer with her. He had stopped walking and was now 10 feet behind her. Harry? She repeated uncertainly. Perhaps his face was white, or it was very white to make her look so concerned and frightened. Harry was standing stock still as waves of shock crashed over him, wave after wave, obliterating everything except the information that had been kept from him for so long. It was Snape who overheard the prophecy. It was Snape who had carried the news of the prophecy to Voldemort. Snape and Peter Pettigrew together had sent Voldemort hunting after Lily and James and their son. Nothing else mattered to Harry just now. Harry, said Professor Trelawney again. Harry, I thought you were going to see the headmaster together. You stay here, said Harry through numb lips. But dear, I was going to tell him how I was assaulted in the room of... You stay here, Harry repeated angrily. She looked alarmed as he ran past her, around the corner to Dumbledore's office, where the lone gargoyle stood sentry. Harry shouted the password at the gargoyle and ran up the moving spiral staircase, 3 steps at a time. He did not knock on Dumbledore's door, he hammered, and the calm voice answered, "Enter," after Harry had already flung himself into the room. Fawkes the Phoenix looked around, his bright black eyes gleaming, with reflected gold and sunset beyond the window. Dumbledore was standing at the window, looking at the grounds, a long black travelling cloak in his arms. "Well, Harry, I promised that you could come with me." For a moment or two, Harry had not understood. The conversation with Professor Trelawney had driven everything else out of his brain, and he seemed to be moving very slowly. "Come with you?" "Only if you wish it, of course. If I—" And then Harry remembered why he had been eager to come to Dumbledore's office in the first place. "You found one? You found a Horcrux?" "I believe so." Rage and resentment fought shock and excitement. For several moments Harry could not speak. "It's natural to be afraid," said Dumbledore. "I'm not scared," said Harry at once. And this was perfectly true. Fear was one emotion he was not feeling at all. "Which Horcrux is it? Where is it?" "I'm not sure which it is, although I think we can rule out the snake. But I believe it to be hidden in a cave on the coast, many miles from here. A cave I've been trying to locate for a very long time. The cave in which Tom Riddle once tormented 2 children from his orphanage on their annual trip. You remember?" "Yes," said Harry. "How is it protected?" "I do not know. I have suspicions that we may be entirely wrong." Dumbledore hesitated and then said, "Harry, I promised you could come along with me, and I stand by that promise, but it would be very wrong of me not to warn you that this will be exceedingly dangerous." "I'm coming," said Harry, almost before Dumbledore had finished speaking. Boiling with anger at Snape, his desire to do something desperate and risky had increased tenfold in the last few minutes. This seemed to show on Harry's face, for Dumbledore moved away from the window and looked more closely at Harry, a slight crease in his silver eyebrows. "What has happened to you?" "Nothing," Harry lied promptly. "What has upset you?" "I'm not upset." "Harry, you were never the good Occlumens." The word was a spark that ignited Harry's fury. "Snape," he said very loudly, and Fawkes gave a small squawk behind them. "Snape's what happened. He told Voldemort about the prophecy. It was him. He lied. He was listening outside the door. Trelawney told me." Dumbledore's expression did not change, but Harry thought his face whitened under the bloody tinge cast by the setting sun. For a long moment Dumbledore did nothing. "When did you find out about this?" he asked at last. "Just now," said Harry, who was refraining from yelling with enormous difficulty, and then suddenly he could not stop himself. "And you let him teach here? And he told Voldemort to go after my mum and dad?" Breathing hard as he could, although he were fighting, Harry turned away from Dumbledore, who had still not moved a muscle, and paced up and down the study, rubbing his knuckles in his hand, and exercising every last bit of restraint to prevent himself from knocking things over. He wanted to rage and storm at Dumbledore, but he also wanted to go with him and try to destroy the Horcrux. He wanted to tell him that he was a foolish old man for trusting Snape, and he was terrified that Dumbledore would not take him along unless he mastered his anger. "Harry," Dumbledore said quietly, "please listen to me." It was as difficult to stop his restless pacing as it was to refrain from shouting. Harry paused, biting his lip, looking into Dumbledore's lined face. "Professor Snape made a terrible— Don't tell me you made a terrible mistake, sir. He was listening at the door." "Please let me finish." Dumbledore waited until Harry had nodded curtly, and then went on. "Professor Snape made a terrible mistake. He was still in Lord Voldemort's employ on that night. He heard the first half of Professor Trelawney's prophecy. Naturally, he hastened to tell his master what he had heard, for it concerned his master most deeply. But what he did not know, what he had no possible way of knowing, which boy Voldemort would hunt from then onwards, or that the parents that he would destroy in his murderous quest, were the people that Professor Snape knew that they were your mother and father." Harry let out a mirthless laughter. "He hated my dad like he hated Sirius. Haven't you noticed, Professor, how the people Snape hates tend to end up dead?" You have no idea the remorse Professor Snape felt when he realized how Lord Voldemort had interpreted the prophecy, Harry. I believe it to be the greatest regret of his life, and the reason that he returned. But he's a very good Occlumens, isn't he, sir? Said Harry, whose voice was shaking with the effort of keeping it steady. And isn't Voldemort convinced that Snape was on his side, even now? Professor, how can you be sure Snape is on our side? Dumbledore did not speak for a moment. He looked as though he was trying to make up his mind about something. At last he said, I am sure. I trust Severus Snape completely. Harry breathed deeply for a few moments in an effort to steady himself. It did not work. Well, I don't, he said, as loudly as before. He's up to something with Draco Malfoy right now, right under your nose, and you still... We've discussed this, Harry, said Dumbledore, and now he sounded stern again. I've told you my views. You're leaving the school tonight, and I'll bet you haven't even considered that Snape and Malfoy might decide to... To what? Asked Dumbledore, his eyebrows raised. What is it you suspect them of doing, precisely? They're up to something, said Harry, and his hands curled into fists as he said it. Professor Trelawney was just in the room of requirement, trying to hide her sherry bottles, and she heard Malfoy whooping, celebrating. He's trying to mend something dangerous in there, and if you ask me, he's fixed it. At last. And you're about to just walk out of the school without... Enough, said Dumbledore. He said it quite calmly, and yet Harry felt silent at once. He knew he'd finally crossed some invisible line. Do you think I have once left the school unprotected during my absences this year? I have not. Tonight, when I leave, uh, there will be additional protections in place. Please do not suggest that I do not take the safety of my students seriously, Harry. I didn't, mumbled Harry, a little abashed, but Dumbledore cut across him. I do not wish to discuss this matter any further. Harry put back a retort, scared that he had gone too far, that he had ruined any chance of accompanying Dumbledore, but Dumbledore went on. Do you wish to come with me tonight? Yes, said Harry at once. Very well. Listen. Dumbledore drew himself up to full height. I take you with me on one condition, that you obey any command I give you at once without question. Of course. Be sure to understand me, Harry. I mean that you must follow orders, even orders such as run, hide, or go back. Do I have your word? Yes, of course. If I tell you to hide, you will do so? Yes. If I tell you to flee, you will obey? Yes. If I tell you to leave me and save yourself, you will do as I tell you? Harry. They looked at each other for a moment. Yes, sir. Very good. Then I wish you to go and fetch your cloak and meet me in the entrance hall in 5 minutes' time. Dumbledore turned back to look out the fiery window. The sun was now ruby red glare along the horizon. Harry walked quickly from the office down the spiral staircase. His mind was oddly clear all of a sudden. He knew what to do. Ron and Harry were sitting together in the common room when he came back. What does Dumbledore want? Hermione said at once. Harry, are you okay? She added anxiously. I'm fine, said Harry shortly, racing past them. He dashed up the stairs to his dormitory, where he flung open his trunk and pulled out the Marauder's map and a pair of balled-up socks. Then he sped back down the stairs and into the common room, skidding a halt to where Ron and Hermione sat, looking stunned. I haven't much time, Harry panted. Dumbledore thinks I am getting my invisibility cloak. Listen. He quickly told them where he was going and why. He did not pause for either of Hermione's gasps of horror or Ron's hasty questions, where they could work out the finer details for themselves later. So you see what this means, Harry finished at a gallop. Dumbledore won't be here tonight. Malfoy's going to have another clear shot at whatever he's up to. No, listen to me, he hissed angrily, as both Ron and Hermione showed every sign of interrupting. I know it was Malfoy celebrating in the room of requirement. Here, he shoved the Marauder's map into Hermione's hand. You've got to watch him. You've got to watch Snape too. Use anyone else you can rustle up from DA. Hermione, those contact galleons should still work, right? Dumbledore says he's put extra protection on the school, but if Snape is involved, He'll know what Dumbledore's protection is and how to avoid it. But he won't be expecting you lot on the watch, will he? Harry, began Hermione, her eyes huge with fear. I haven't got time to argue, Harry said curtly. Take this as well. He thrust the socks into Ron's hands. Thanks, said Ron. Why do I need socks? It's what's wrapped in them. It's Felix Felicius. Share it between yourselves, and Ginny too. Say goodbye to her from me. I'd better go. Dumbledore's waiting. No, said Hermione, and Ron unwrapped the tiny little bottle of golden potion, looking awestruck. We don't want it. You take it. Who knows what you'll be facing? I'll be fine. I'll be with Dumbledore, said Harry. I want to know you lot are okay. Don't look like that, Hermione. I'll see you later. And he was off, scurrying back through the portrait hole towards the entrance hall. Dumbledore was waiting beside the oaken front doors. He turned as Harry came skidding out the topmost stone step, panting hard, searing a stitch in his side. I would like you to wear your cloak, please, said Dumbledore, and he waited until Harry had thrown it on before saying, Very good. Shall we go? Dumbledore set off at once down the stone steps, his own travelling cloak barely stirring in the still summer air. Harry hurried alongside him under the invisibility cloak, still panting and sweating rather a lot. But what will people think when they see you leaving, Professor? Harry asked, his mind on Snape and Malfoy. That I am off to Hogsmeade for a drink, said Dumbledore lightly. I sometimes offer Rose Myrtle my custom, or else visit the Hog's Head, or appear to. It is a good way as any, as disguising one's true intention. They made their way down the drive in the gathering twilight. The air was full of smells of warm grass, lake water, and wood smoke from Hagrid's cabin. It was difficult to believe they were heading for anything more dangerous or frightening. Professor, said Harry quietly at the bottom of the drive as it came into view, will we be apparating? Yes, said Dumbledore. You can apparate now, I believe. Yes, said Harry, but I don't have a license. He felt it best to be honest. What if he spoiled everything by turning up 100 miles from where they were supposed to go? No matter, said Dumbledore. I can assist you again. They turned out of the gates into the twilit, deserted lane of Hogsmeade. Darkness descended fast, and as they walked, and by the time they reached the high street, night was falling in earnest. Lights twinkled from the windows over the shops, and the nearest of the three broomsticks they heard raucous laughter. And stay out, said Madame Rosemerta, forcibly ejecting a grubby-looking wizard. Oh, hello, Albus. You're out late. Good evening, Rosemerta. Good evening. Forgive me, I'm off to the Hog's Head. No offence, but I feel like a quieter atmosphere tonight. A minute later, they turned the corner into the side street where the Hog's Head sign creaked a little, though there was no breeze. In contrast to the three broomsticks, the pub appeared to be completely empty. It will not be necessary for us to enter, muttered Dumbledore, glancing around, as long as nobody sees us go. Now, place your hand on my arm, Harry. There's no need to grip too hard. I'm merely guiding you. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Harry turned. At once there was that horrible sensation that he was being squeezed through a thick rubber tube. He could not draw a breath. Every part of him was being completely compressed, almost past endurance, and then, when he thought he might suffocate, the invisible hand seemed to burst open, and he was standing in cool darkness, breathing in lungfuls of fresh, salty air. End of chapter 25. Take a wee short break here. What's Nimbus doing? Back in his hammock? Oh, stream's a bit more stable now. Don't know what was happening with my internet earlier. It was just going wild. Right, I'm going to get a refill of water. Be back in 2 seconds. there goes my... Oh, it's back. Let's see, how big is this chapter? Yeah, it's not very big. Yeah, last couple of chapters aren't too long, but I don't think I could finish it tonight. But we'll do one more at least. Sit back, get cozy, as we're reading The Cave. Harry could smell salt and hear rushing waves. A light, chilly breeze ruffled his hair as he looked out at the moonlit sea and star-strewn sky. He was standing upon a high outcrop of dark rock, water forming, foaming, churning below him. He glanced over his shoulder. A towering cliff stood behind, a sheer drop, black and faceless. A few large chunks of rock, such as the one upon which Harry and Dumbledore were standing, looked as though they had broken away from the cliff face at some point in the past. It was a bleak view. The sea and the rock, unrelieved by any tree or sweep of grass or sand. "What do you think?" asked Dumbledore. He might have been asking Harry his opinion whether it would be a good site for a picnic. "They brought the kids from the orphanage here?" asked Harry, who could not imagine a less cosy spot for a day trip. "Not here precisely," said Dumbledore. "There is a village of sorts about halfway along the cliffs behind us. I believe the orphans were taken there for a little sea air and a view of the waves. No, I think it was only ever Tom Riddle and his youthful victims who visited this spot. No Muggle could reach this rock unless they were uncommonly good mountaineers. Boats cannot approach these cliffs. The waters around them are too dangerous. I imagine that Riddle climbed down. Magic would have served better than ropes. And he brought the two small children with him, probably for the pleasure of terrorizing them. I think the journey alone would have done it, don't you?" Harry looked up at the cliff again and felt goosebumps. But his final destination, and ours, lies a little further on. Come. Dumbledore beckoned to Harry at the very edge of the rock, where a series of jagged niches had made footholds that led down to boulders, and that they lay half submerged in water, closer to the cliff. It was a treacherous descent, and Dumbledore, hampered slightly by his withered hand, moved slowly. The lower rocks were slippery with the sea water. Harry could feel flecks of cold salt spray hitting his face. "Lumos," said Dumbledore, as he reached the boulder closest to the cliff face. 1,000 flecks of golden light sparked upon the dark surface of the water a few feet below where they were crouched. The black wall of rock beside him was illuminated too. "You see," said Dumbledore quietly, holding his wand a little higher. Harry saw a fissure in the cliff, into which dark water was swirling. "You will not object to getting a little wet?" "No," said Harry. "Then take off your invisibility cloak. There is no need for it now. And let us take the plunge." And with the sudden agility of a younger man, Dumbledore slid from the boulder, landed in the sea, and began to swim with a perfect breaststroke toward the dark slit in the rock face, his wand held in his teeth. Harry pulled off his cloak, stuffed it into his pocket, and followed. The water was icy. Harry's waterlogged clothes billowed around him, weighing him down. Taking deep breaths and filling his nostrils with a tang of salt and seaweed, he struck out for the shimmering, shrinking light, now moving deeper into the cliff. The fissure soon opened up into a dark tunnel that Harry could tell would be filled with water at high tide. The slimy walls were barely 3 feet apart and glimmered like wet tar in the passing light of Dumbledore's wand. A little way in, the passageway curved to the left, and Harry saw that it extended far into the cliff. He continued to swim in Dumbledore's wake, the tips of his benumbed fingers brushing the rough, wet rock. Then he saw Dumbledore rising out of the water ahead, his silver hair and dark robes gleaming. When Harry reached the spot, he found steps that led into a large cave. He clambered up them, water streaming from his soaking clothes, and emerged, shivering uncontrollably, into the still and freezing air. Dumbledore was standing in the middle of the cave, his wand held high, as he was turning slowly on the spot, examining the walls and ceiling. "Yes, this is the place," said Dumbledore. "How can you tell?" Harry spoke in a whisper. "It has known magic," said Dumbledore simply. Harry could not tell if the shivers he was experiencing were due to a spine-deep coldness or to the same awareness of enchantments. He watched as Dumbledore continued to revolve on the spot, evidently concentrating on things Harry could not see. "This is merely the antechamber, the entrance hall," said Dumbledore after a moment or two. "We need to penetrate the inner place. Now it is Lord Voldemort's obstacles that stand in our way, rather than those nature made." Dumbledore approached the wall of the cave and caressed it with blackened fingers, murmuring words in a strange tongue that Harry did not understand. Twice Dumbledore walked right around the cave, touching as much of the rough rock as he could, occasionally pausing, running his fingertips backwards and forwards over a particular spot, until he finally stopped, pressing his hand flat against the wall. "Here," he said, "we go on through here. The entrance is concealed." Harry did not know how Dumbledore knew. He had never seen a wizard work out things like this, simply by looking and touching. But Harry had long since learned that bangs and smoke were often the marks of ineptitude in expertise. Dumbledore stepped back from the cave wall and pointed his wand at the rock. For a moment an arched outline appeared there, blazing white, as though there was some powerful light behind the crack. "You've done it," said Harry through chattering teeth, but as his words left his lips, the outline has gone, leaving the rock bare and solid as ever. Dumbledore looked around. "Harry, I'm so sorry, I forgot," he said, pointed his wand at Harry, and at once Harry's clothes were warm and dry, as if they'd been hanging in front of a blazing fire. "Thank you," said Harry gratefully, but Dumbledore had already turned his attention back to the solid stone cave. He did not try any more magic, but simply stood there, staring at it intently, as though something extremely interesting was written on it. Harry stayed quite still. He did not want to break Dumbledore's concentration. Then, after 2 solid minutes, Dumbledore said quietly, "Oh, surely not. So crude." "What is it, Professor?" "I rather think," said Dumbledore, putting his uninjured hand inside his robes and drawing out a short silver knife, of the kind Harry used to chop potion ingredients, "that we are required to make a payment to pass." "Payment?" said Harry. "You've got to give the door something." "Yes," said Dumbledore. "Blood, if I'm not mistaken." "Blood?" "I said it was crude," said Dumbledore, who sounded disdainful, even disappointed, as though Voldemort had fallen short of his standards. "The idea, as I'm sure you will have gathered, is that your enemy must weaken himself or herself to enter. Once again, Lord Voldemort fails to grasp that there are much more terrible things than physical injury." "Yes, but still, if you can avoid it," said Harry, who had experienced enough pain to be keen not for more. "Sometimes, however, it is unavoidable," said Dumbledore, shaking back the sleeve of his robes, exposing the forearm of his uninjured hand. "Professor," protested Harry, hurrying forwards as Dumbledore raised his knife. "I'll do it. He didn't know what he was going to say. Younger? Fitter? But Dumbledore merely smiled. There was a flash of silver and a spurt of scarlet. The rock face was peppered with dark, glistening drops. "You are very kind, Harry," said Dumbledore now passing the tip of his wand over the deep cut in his own arm, and it healed instantly, just as Snape had healed Malfoy's wounds. "But your blood is worth more than mine." "Ah, that seems to have done the trick, doesn't it?" The blazing silver outline of the arch that had appeared in the wall appeared once more, and this time it did not fade away. The blood splattered the rock within it, simply vanished, leaving an opening into what seemed to be total darkness. "After me, I think," said Dumbledore, as he walked through the archway, with Harry on his heels, lighting his own wand hastily as he went. An eerie sight met their eyes. They were standing on the edge of a great black lake, so vast that Harry could not make out the distant banks, in a cavern so high that the ceiling, too, was out of sight. A misty greenish light shone far away in what looked like the middle of the lake. It was reflected completely, it was reflected in the completely still water below. The greenish glow and the light from the two wands were the only things that broke the otherwise velvety darkness. Although their rays did not penetrate as far as Harry would have expected, the darkness was somehow denser than normal darkness. "Let us walk," said Dumbledore quietly. "Be very careful not to step in the water. Stay close to me." He set off around the edge of the lake, and Harry followed close behind him. Their footsteps were echoing, slapping sounds on the narrow rim of the rock that surrounded the water. On and on they walked, but the view did not vary. On one side of them, the rough cavern wall, and on the other, the boundless expanse of smooth, glassy blackness, in the middle of which was a mysterious greenish glow. Harry found the place and the silence oppressive, unnerving. "Professor," he said finally, "do you think the Horcrux is here?" "Oh, yes," said Dumbledore. "Yes, I'm sure it is. The question is, how do we get to it?" We couldn't we couldn't try a summoning charm," Harry said, unsure of whether this was a stupid question, but much keener than he was prepared to admit on getting out of this place as possible. "Certainly we could," said Dumbledore, stopping so suddenly that Harry almost walked into him. "Why don't you do it?" "Me? Oh, okay." Harry had not expected this, but cleared his throat and said loudly, wand aloft, "Accio Horcrux." With a noise like an explosion, something very large and pale erupted out of the water some 20 feet away. Before Harry could see what it was, it had vanished again. With a crashing sound, it made great deep ripples on the mirror's surface. Harry leapt backwards in shock and hit the wall, his heart still thundering, and he turned to Dumbledore. "What was that?" "Something, I think, that is ready to respond should we attempt to or attempt to seize the Horcrux." Harry looked back at the water. The surface of the lake was once more shining black glass. The ripples had vanished unnaturally fast. Harry's heart, however, was still pounding. "Did you think that would happen, sir?" "I thought something would happen if we made an obvious attempt to get our hands on the Horcrux." "That was a very good idea, Harry. Much the simplest way of finding out what we are facing." "We don't know what that thing was," said Harry, looking at the sinisterly smooth water. "What those things are, you mean?" said Dumbledore. "I doubt very much there is only one of them. Shall we take a walk?" "Professor?" "Yes, Harry?" "Do you think we're going to have to go into the lake?" "Into it? Only if we're very unfortunate." "You don't think the Horcrux is at the bottom?" "Oh, no, I think the Horcrux is in the middle." And Dumbledore pointed towards the misty green light in the centre of the lake. "So we're going to have to cross to get to it?" "Yes, I think so." Harry did not say anything. His thoughts were all water monsters and giant serpents and demons and kelpies and spirits. "Aha!" said Dumbledore, and he stopped again. This time Harry really did walk into him. For a moment he toppled on the edge of the water, and Dumbledore's uninjured hand closed tightly around his upper arm, pulling him back. "So sorry, Harry. I should have given a warning." "Stand back against the wall, please. I think we have found the place." Harry had no idea what Dumbledore meant. This patch of dark bank was exactly like every other bit as far as he could tell, but Dumbledore seemed to have detected something special about it. This time he was running his hand, not over the rocky wall, but through thin air, as though expecting to find or grip something invisible. "Oh-ho!" said Dumbledore happily. Seconds later his hand closed upon mid-air, something Harry could not see. Dumbledore moved closer to the water. Harry watched nervously as the tips of Dumbledore's shoes found the utmost edge of the rock's rim. Keeping his hand clenched in midair, Dumbledore raised his wand with the other hand and tapped his fist on the point. Immediately, a thick coppery green chain appeared out of the air and extending into the depth of the water, or from the depths of the water into Dumbledore's clenched hand. Dumbledore tapped the chain, which began to slide through his fist like a snake, coiling itself on the ground with a clinking sound that echoed noisily off the rocky walls, pulling something from the depths of the black water. Harry gasped as the ghostly prow of a tiny boat broke the surface, glowing as green as the chain, and floated with barely a ripple toward the place on the bank where Harry and Dumbledore stood. "How did you know that was there?" said Harry in astonishment. "Magic always leaves traces," said Dumbledore, as the boat hit the bank with a gentle bump. "Sometimes very distinctive traces. I taught Tom Riddle. I know his style." Is the boat safe?" "Oh yes, I think so." Voldemort needed to create a means to cross the lake without attracting the wrath of those creatures he had placed within it, in case he ever wanted to revisit or remove his Horcrux. So the thing in the water won't do anything to us if we cross in Voldemort's boat. I think we must resign ourselves to the fact that they will, at some point, realize we are not Lord Voldemort. Thus far, however, we have done well. We have not allowed ourselves, they have allowed us to raise the boat. "But why have they let us?" asked Harry, who could not shake the vision of tentacles rising out of the dark water the moment they were out of sight of the bank. Voldemort would have been reasonably confident that none but a very great wizard would have been able to find the boat, said Dumbledore. "I think he would have been prepared to risk what is, to his mind, the most unlikely possibility that someone else would find it, knowing that he would set other obstacles ahead that only he would be able to penetrate. Shall we see whether he was right?" Harry looked down into the boat. It really was very small. "It doesn't look like it was built for two people. Will it really hold both of us? Or will it be too heavy together?" Voldemort chuckled. Dumbledore chuckled. "Voldemort will not have cared about the weight, but about the amount of magical power that crossed the lake. I rather think an enchantment will have been placed upon this boat, so that only one wizard at a time will be able to sail in it. But then, I do not think you will count Harry. You are underage, unqualified. Voldemort would never have expected a 16-year-old to reach this place. I think it unlikely that your powers will register compared to mine." These words did nothing to raise Harry's morale. Perhaps Dumbledore knew it, for he added, "Voldemort's mistake, Harry, Voldemort's mistake. Age is foolish and forgetful when it underestimates youth. Now, you first this time, and careful not to touch the water." Dumbledore stood aside, and Harry climbed into the boat. Dumbledore stepped in, too, coiling the chain on the floor. They were cramped together. Harry could not comfortably sit, but crouched, his knees jutted up over the edge of the boat, which began to move at once. There was no other sound other than the silken rustle of the boat's prow cleaving the water. It moved without their help, as though an invisible rope was pulling it on toward the light in the centre. Soon they could no longer see the walls of the cavern. They might as well have been at sea, except there were no waves. Harry looked down and saw reflected in the gold of the wand light, sparkling and glittering on the black water as they passed. The boat was carving deep ripples upon the glassy surface, grooves in the dark mirror. And then Harry saw it, marble white, floating inches below the surface. "Professor," he said in a startled voice, echoed loudly over the silent water. "Harry, I think I saw a hand in the water, a human hand." "Yes, I'm sure you did," said Dumbledore calmly. Harry stared down into the water, looking for the vanished hand, and a sick feeling rose in his throat. So that thing jumped out of the water? But Harry had his answer before Dumbledore could reply. His wand light slid over a fresh patch of water and showed him, this time, a dead man lying face up, inches beneath the surface, his open eyes misted as though with cobwebs, his hair and his robes swirling around him like smoke. "There are bodies in here," said Harry. His voice sounded much higher than usual, most unlike his own. "Yes," said Dumbledore placidly, "but we do not need to worry about them at the moment." "At the moment?" Harry repeated, tearing his gaze from the water to look at Dumbledore. "Not while we are merely drifting peaceably below us," said Dumbledore. "There is nothing to be feared from a body, Harry, any more than there is anything to be feared from the darkness. Lord Voldemort, who of course secretly fears both, disagrees, and once again he reveals his own lack of wisdom. There is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." Harry said nothing, but did not argue. He found the idea that there were bodies floating around them and beneath them horrible, and what was more, he did not believe that they were not dangerous. "But one of them jumped," he said, trying to make his voice as level and as calm as Dumbledore's. "When I tried to summon the Horcrux, a body leapt out of the lake." "Yes," said Dumbledore, "I am sure that once we take the Horcrux, we will find them less peaceable. However, uh, like many creatures that dwell in the cold or darkness, they fear light and warmth. We shall, therefore, call them to our aid should the need arise. Fire, Harry," Dumbledore added with a smile in response to Harry's bewildered expression. "Oh, right," said Harry quickly, and turned his head to look at the greenish glow towards which the boat was still sailing. He could not pretend now that he was not scared. The great black lake, teeming with the dead. It seemed hours and hours ago that he'd met Professor Trelawney, and he'd given Ron and Hermione the Felix Felicis. He suddenly wished he'd said a better goodbye to them. He hadn't seen Ginny at all. "Nearly there," said Dumbledore cheerfully. Not enough. The greenish light seemed to be glowing larger at last, and within minutes the boat came to a halt, bumping gently into something that Harry could not see at first. But when he raised his illuminated wand, he saw that they had reached the small island of smooth rock in the centre of the lake. "Careful not to touch the water," said Dumbledore again, as Harry climbed out of the boat. The island was no longer or larger than Dumbledore's office, an expanse of flat, dark stone on which stood nothing but the source of that greenish light. It looked much brighter when viewed close to. Harry squinted at first. He thought that it was a lamp of some kind, but then he saw the light that was coming from the stone basin. It was rather like a pensieve, which was on top of a pedestal. Dumbledore approached the basin, and Harry followed. Side by side they looked down into it. The basin was full of an emerald liquid, emitting that phosphorescent glow. "What is it?" said Harry quietly. "I am not sure," said Dumbledore. "Something more worrisome than blood and bodies, however." Dumbledore pushed back the sleeve of his robe over his blackened hand and stretched the tips of his burned fingers towards the surface of the potion. "No, sir, don't touch." "I cannot touch," said Dumbledore, smiling faintly. "See? I cannot approach any nearer than this. You try." Staring, Harry put his hand into the basin and attempted to touch the potion. He met an invisible barrier that prevented him from coming within an inch of it. No matter how hard he pushed, his finger encountered nothing but what seemed to be solid, inflexible air. "Out of the way, please, Harry," said Dumbledore. He raised his wand and made complicated movements over the surface of the potion, murmuring soundlessly. Nothing happened, except that the potion glowed a little brighter. Harry remained silent while Dumbledore worked, but after a while Dumbledore withdrew his wand, and Harry felt it was safe to talk again. "You think the Horcrux is in there, sir?" "Oh, yes." Dumbledore peered more closely into the basin. Harry saw his face reflected, upside down, on the smooth surface of the green potion. But how to reach it? This potion cannot be penetrated by hand, vanished, parted, scooped up, or siphoned away, nor can it be transfigured, charmed, or otherwise made to change its nature. Almost absent-mindedly, Dumbledore raised his wand again, twirled it once in mid-air, and caught the crystal goblet that he conjured out of nowhere. I can only conclude that this potion should be drunk. What? Said Harry. No. Yes, I think so. Only by drinking it can I empty the basin and see what lies in its depths. But what if it kills you? Oh, I doubt it would work like that, said Dumbledore easily. Lord Voldemort would not want to kill the person who reached this island. Harry couldn't believe it. It was more of Dumbledore's insane determination to see good in everyone. See much longer have we got? Oh, still a wee bit. Sir, said Harry, trying to keep his voice reasonable. Sir, this is Voldemort. I'm sorry, Harry. I should have said. We would not want to immediately kill the person who reached this island, Dumbledore corrected himself. He would want to keep them live long enough to see how they'd managed to penetrate so far through his defences, and, most importantly of all, why were they so intent on emptying the basin? Do not forget that Lord Voldemort believes that he alone knows about his Horcruxes. Harry made to speak again, but this time Dumbledore raised his hand for silence, frowning slightly at the emerald liquid, evidently thinking hard. Undoubtedly, he said finally, this potion must act in a way that will prevent me from taking the Horcrux. It might paralyze me, cause me to forget why I'm here, create so much pain that I am distracted, or render me incapable in some other way. This being the case, Harry, it will be your job to make sure that I keep drinking. Even if you have to tip the potion into my protesting mouth, you understand? Their eyes met over the basin, each pale face lit with that strange green light. Harry did not speak. This is why he had been invited along, so that he could force-feed Dumbledore a potion that might cause him unenduring pain. You remember, said Dumbledore, the condition on which I brought you with me. He hesitated, looking into the blue eye, or Harry hesitated, looking into the blue eyes that had turned green in the reflecting light of the basin. But what if you swore, did you not, to follow my command I gave you? Yes, but I warned you, did I not, that there might be danger? Yes, said Harry, but... Well then, said Dumbledore, shaking back his sleeves once more and raising the empty goblet. You have my orders. Why can't I drink the potion instead? Said Harry desperately. Because I am much older, much cleverer, and much less valuable, said Dumbledore. Once and for all, Harry, do I have your word that you will do all in your power to make me keep drinking? Couldn't do I have it? But your word, Harry. All right, but before Harry could make any further protests, Dumbledore lowered the crystal goblet into the potion. For a split second, Harry hoped that he would not be able to touch the potion with the goblet, but it sank into the crystal surface, as nothing else had. When the glass was full to the brim, Dumbledore lifted it to his mouth. Your good health, Harry. He drained the goblet. Harry watched, terrified, his hands gripping the rim of the basin so hard that his fingertips were numb. Professor, he said anxiously, as Professor Dumbledore lowered the empty glass. How do you feel? Dumbledore shook his head and his eyes closed. Harry wondered whether he was in pain. Dumbledore plunged the glass blindly into the basin, refilled it, and drank once more. In silence, Dumbledore drank 3 goblets full of potion, and then, halfway through the 4th, he staggered and fell forwards against the basin. His eyes were still closed, breathing heavily. Professor Dumbledore, said Harry, his voice strained. Can you hear me? Dumbledore did not answer. His face was twitching, as though he was deeply asleep, but dreaming a horrible dream. His grip on the goblet was slacking. Potion was about to spill from it. Harry reached forward and grabbed the crystal cup, holding it steady. Professor, can you hear me? He repeated loudly, his voice echoing around the cabin. Dumbledore panted, then spoke in a voice Harry did not recognise, for he had never heard Dumbledore frightened like this. I don't want... Don't make me... Harry stared into the whitened face he knew so well, at the crooked nose, the half-moon spectacles, and did not know what to do. Don't like... want to stop, moaned Dumbledore. You can't stop, Professor, said Harry. You got to keep drinking, remember? You told me you had to keep drinking. Here. Hating himself, repulsed by what he was doing, Harry forced the goblet back towards Dumbledore's mouth and tipped it so that Dumbledore drank the remainder of the potion inside. No, he groaned as Harry lowered the goblet back into the basin and refilled it for him. I don't want to. I don't want to. Let me go. It's all right, Professor, said Harry, his hand shaking. It's all right. I'm here. Make it stop. Make it stop, moaned Dumbledore. Yes, this'll make it stop, lied Harry. He tipped the contents of the goblet into Dumbledore's open mouth. Dumbledore screamed. The noise echoed all around the vast chamber, across the black, dead water. No, 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 I can't. I can't. Don't make me. I don't want to. It's all right, Professor, it's all right, said Harry loudly, his hand shaking so badly he could hardly scoop up the sixth potion, goblet full of potion. The basin was now half empty. Nothing's happening to you. You're safe. This isn't real. I swear it isn't real. Take it now. Take this. And obediently Dumbledore drank, as though it was an antidote Harry offered him. Upon draining the goblet, he sank to his knees, shaking uncontrollably. It's all my fault, he sobbed. Please make it stop. I know I did wrong. Oh, please make it stop. I'll never, never again. This'll make it stop, Professor, Harry said, his voice cracking as he tipped the seventh glass into Dumbledore's mouth. Dumbledore began to cower, as though invisible torture surrounded him. His flailing hand almost knocked over the refilled goblet from Harry's trembling hands as he moaned, Don't hurt them. Don't hurt them. Please, please, it's my fault. Hurt me instead. Drink this, you'll be all right, said Harry, desperately. Once again Dumbledore obeyed him, opening his mouth, keeping his eyes shut, as he shook from head to toe. And now he fell forwards, screaming again, hammering his fists on the ground while Harry refilled the ninth goblet. Please, 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 no, not that, not that, I'll do anything. Just drink, Professor, just drink. Dumbledore drank like a child dying of thirst. When he was finished, he yelled as though his insides were on fire. No more, please, no more. Harry scooped up the 10th goblet of potion and felt the crystal scrape against something at the bottom of the basin. We're nearly there, Professor. Drink this. Drink it. He supported Dumbledore's shoulders, and again Dumbledore drained the glass. Harry was on his feet once more, refilling the goblet as Dumbledore began to scream in more anguish than ever. I want to die. I want to die. Make it stop. Make it stop. I want to die. Drink this, Professor. Drink it. Dumbledore drank, and no sooner had he finished than he yelled, Kill me! This one will, gasped Harry. Just drink this. It'll be all over. All over. Dumbledore gulped at the goblet, draining every last drop, and then, with a great, rattling gasp, he rolled over onto his face. No! Shouted Harry, who had stood to refill the goblet again. Instead he dropped the cup into the basin, flung himself down beside Dumbledore, and heaved him over onto his back. Dumbledore's glasses were askew, his mouth agape, his eyes closed. No, said Harry, shaking Dumbledore. No, you're not dead. That wasn't poison. Wake up. Wake up. Re-enervate, he cried, his wand pointing at Dumbledore's chest. There was a flash of red light, but nothing happened. Re-enervate. Sir, please. Dumbledore's eyes flickered. Harry's heart leapt. Sir, are you... Water, croaked Dumbledore. Water, panted Harry. Yes. He leapt to his feet, seized the goblet that he dropped in the basin. He barely recognized the golden locket. He barely registered the golden locket lying curled beneath it. Aguamente, he shouted, jabbing the locket with his wand. The goblet filled with clear water. Harry dropped to his knees beside Dumbledore, raised his head and brought the glass to his lips, but it was empty. Dumbledore groaned and began to pant. But I had some. Wait, Aguamente, said Harry again, pointing his wand at the goblet. Once more, for a second, clear water gleamed within it. But as he approached Dumbledore's mouth, the water vanished again. Sir, I'm trying, said Harry desperately. But he did not think Dumbledore could hear him, as he rolled over onto his side, drawing great, rattling breaths that sounded agonizing. Aguamente, Aguamente, Aguamente! The goblet filled and emptied once more, and now Dumbledore's breathing was fading. His brain whirling in panic, Harry knew instinctively that he had only one way left to get the water, because Voldemort had planned it so. He flung himself over the edge of the rock and plunged the goblet into the lake, uh, bringing it up full to the brim of icy water that did not vanish. Sir, here, Harry yelled. Lunging forward, he tipped the water clumsily over Dumbledore's face. It was the best he could do, for the icy feeling on his arm, not holding the cup, was not the lingering chill of water. A sliming white hand had gripped his wrist, and the creature to whom it belonged was pulling him slowly backwards towards the rock. The surface of the lake was no longer mirror smooth, but churning, and everywhere Harry looked, I have lost my place. I am so sorry. And everywhere Harry looked, white heads and hands were emerging from the dark water. Men, women, and children with sunken eyes, sightless, were moving toward the rock, an army of the dead rising from the black water. Petrificus totalis, yelled Harry, struggling to cling to the smooth, soaked surface of the island, as he pointed his wand at the inferius that had his arm. It released him, falling back into the water with a splash. He scrambled to his feet, but many more inferi were already clambering onto the rock, their bony hands clawing at the slippery surface, their blank, frosted eyes upon him, trailing waterlogged rags, sunken faces leering. Petrificus totalis, Harry bellowed again, backing away as he whipped his wand through the air. 6, 7 of them crumpled, and more were coming towards him. Impedimentia incarcerius. A few of them stumbled. 1 or 2 of them were bound in ropes, and those climbing onto the rock behind him merely stepped over the falling bodies. Still slashing the air with his wand, Harry yelled, Spectum Sempra, Sectum Sempra. Though gashes appeared in their sodden rags and their icy skin, they had no blood to spill. They walked on, unfeeling, their shrunken hands outstretched towards him, and as he backed away further still, he felt arms enclose him from behind, thin, fleshless arms, cold as death, and his feet left the ground as they lifted him and began to carry him, slowly but surely, back into the water, where he knew there would be no release. He would be drowned. He would become one of the dead guardians, a fragment of Voldemort's shattered soul. But then, through the darkness, fire erupted, crimson and gold, a ring of fire that surrounded the rock, so that the inferi holding Harry uh, stumbled and faltered. They did not dare pass through the flames to get to the water. They dropped Harry. He hit the ground, slipped on the rock and fell, grazing his arms, but standing back up, raising his wand and staring around. Dumbledore was on his feet again, pale as any of the surrounding inferi, but taller than any two, the fire dancing in his eyes. His wand was raised like a torch, and from its tip emanated the flames like a vast lasso, encircling them all with warmth. The inferi bumped into each other, attempting blindly to escape the fire in which they were enclosed. Dumbledore scooped the locket from the bottom of the stone basin and stowed it inside his robes. Wordlessly, he gestured for Harry to come to his side. Distracted by the flames, the inferi seemed unaware that their quarry was leaving, as Dumbledore led Harry back to the boat, the ring of fire moving with them, around them. The bewildered inferi accompanied them to the water's edge, where they slipped gratefully back into their dark waters. Harry, who was shaking all over, thought for a moment that Dumbledore might not be able to climb into the boat. He staggered a little as he attempted it. All his efforts seemed to be going into maintaining the ring of protective flame. Harry seized him and helped him into a seat. Once they were both jammed back inside, the boat began to move back across the black water, away from the rock, still encircled in that ring of fire. It seemed that the inferi, swimming below them, did not dare resurface. "Sir," panted Harry, "Sir, I forgot about fire. They were coming at me and I panicked." "Quite understandable," murmured Dumbledore. Harry was alarmed to hear how faint his voice was. They reached the bank with a little bump, and Harry leapt out and turned quickly to help Dumbledore. The moment that Dumbledore reached the bank, he let his wand hand fall. The ring of fire vanished, but the inferi did not emerge again from the water. The little boat sank into the water once more, clinking and tinkling. The chain slithered back into the lake too. Dumbledore gave a great sigh and leaned against the cavern wall. "I am weak," he said. "Don't worry, sir," said Harry at once, anxious about Dumbledore's extreme pallor, his air of exhaustion. "Don't worry, I'll get us back. Lean on me, sir." And pulling Dumbledore's uninjured arm around his shoulders, Harry guided the headmaster back around the lake, bearing most of his weight. "The protection was, after all, well designed," said Dumbledore faintly. One alone could not have done it. You did well, Harry." "Don't talk now," said Harry, fearing how slurred Dumbledore's voice had become, how much his feet dragged. "Save your energy, sir. We'll be out of here. The archway will have been sealed again. My knife—" "There's no need. I got cut in the rock," said Harry firmly. "Just tell me where." "Here." Harry wiped his grazed forearm on the stone. Having received its tribute of blood, the archway reopened instantly. They crossed the outer cave, and Harry helped Dumbledore back into the icy sea that filled the crevice of the cave. "It's going to be all right, sir," Harry said over and over again, more worried by Dumbledore's silence than he had been by his weakened voice. "We're nearly there. I can apparate us both back. Don't worry." "I am not worried, Harry," said Dumbledore, his voice a little stronger despite the freezing water. "I am with you." End of chapter 26. Forget Dumbledore, it's my voice that's nearly gone here. But that's the point of all this. Hoping to practice, get a wee bit stronger, a wee bit better. Reading and speaking. Thank you for listening to me. I'll get this up on YouTube. Unfortunately, those other chapters of the Hunger Games, they won't have any audio on them. So apologies about that. But the next couple of chapters are they're the more interesting ones anyway, sure. And I'd encourage you to buy these books anyway. They're really good reading. And I hope to show you more books that I've enjoyed reading over my life. There's lots of variety, and I know I usually read Harry Potter on Fantasy Fridays, whenever I can be bothered after work on a Friday, but there's a load more fantasy books which are just as, if not more ingenious than Harry Potter, written in worlds so rich with fantasy you wouldn't believe. I like to get into reading the Edge Chronicles. Those were some of my favourite when I was growing up. There's them. There's anything by Jonathan Stroud. He does really good fantasy worlds. I'd like to read all the footnotes. Those are maybe a bit difficult to understand. Gareth Nix as well. Any series of his, really well written. But oh, there goes my camera. Well, that's a good place to end it there. Look at that boy. What a sweetheart. Again, thank you for listening, and hopefully see you soon.